part of being a patient advocate means that you can't only articulate what's wrong with the current policies and regulations, but you also have to have an eye on the future of where you want to see medical cannabis policy go. And as president of Americans for Safe Access, I've had the benefit of having many mentors and advisors. And I'm very excited for the next panel, Tomorrow, the World We Envision, Safe and Affordable Access for All, to introduce you to two of my favorite advisors and people that have helped shape the vision for Americans for Safe Access's policy. And first, we're going to hear from Dr. Claude. He is a faculty lecturer at the Department of Family Medicine at McGill University in Canada. He has been practicing family medicine in Quebec since 1996. He is an associate researcher of the Quebec Cannabis Registry, which is the world's first database on the use of cannabis for medical purposes. He is a recognized cannabis educator and government advisor, and he is also the author of an amazing textbook that was just published called Cannabis and Cannabinoid-Based Medicines in Cancer Care, a comprehensive guide to medical cannabis management. And he presently works as a member of the Supportive and Palliative Care Division at McGill University Center. And we're going to hear from Dr. Dedi Meiri. If you haven't heard him speak, you're in for a treat. He is currently at the Laboratory of Cancer Biology and Cannabinoid Research at Israel Institute of Technology. He heads the laboratory there, and he is also at the Faculty of Biology at Technion at the Israel Institute of Technology. He has actually started his career as a member of the Technion Integrated Cancer Center, and he holds his PhD in microchemistry and plant biotechnology from Tel Aviv University, and he conducted his postdoctoral fellowship at Ontario Cancer Institute. Currently at his lab, he's investigating the vast therapeutic potential of cannabinoids and other bioactive components, and he is also operating the Cannabis Database Project in his lab, where he is involved with several clinical trials covering diverse aspects of cannabis treatments. I'm so excited that our members get to meet these two amazing contributors to the medical use of cannabis.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining me to this Zoom talk. My name is Dedi Meiri, and I'm professor at the Technion, which is the Technology Institute of Israel. And in the last a little bit more even years, my lab is doing a lot with medicinal plants in general, and with cannabis in particular. And I want to talk with you today and to show you how we trying to match the right combination of molecules, or the right type of cannabis to the right indication, and how I think it's affecting other medicinal plants, how I see the future of medicinal plants in general. So let's share my screen and start the talk. So cannabis is a unique plant. I guess in these years, I don't need to talk too much about cannabis. I think most of the audience will know what is cannabis and what it's doing. But I will give a short introduction by saying that cannabis is a unique plant because it's harboring a unique molecules called cannabinoids. They were discovered by Professor Rafi Meshulam in the 60s, and we find more and more of them, which one of the major is THC, which is a psychoactive molecules, but we have other molecules like CBD and CBC and CBG, which are not psychoactive or not changing our conception or not hallucinogenic, because to say that they are not psychoactive, it's a little bit not accurate. Even though cannabis harboring these molecules, the reason is making this plant very unique is actually because these molecules affecting our body and our system, which called the endocannabinoid system. And actually our body producing these molecules. We call them endocannabinoids in our body. And it's a very unique system because it's a system that balancing and bringing things to homeostasis, to balance in every cell in our body. Every cell in our body harboring the endocannabinoids, the two component of the endocannabinoid system, the endocannabinoids, which are the molecules that the cells produce, and the receptors that can bind them and read them and send signaling to the cell. So actually the endocannabinoid system, it's a signaling between two cells. One cell sends a signal to another cell. The signal, we will call it endocannabinoids. The signal is a small molecule, we call it endocannabinoids. On the other cell, there are receptors, which are protein, that will capture that and send a signal. There are many endocannabinoids in our body. In my lab today, in the blood samples, we can read more than 100 endocannabinoids, and there are many receptors. We know CB1 and CB2, but my lab today look on over than 35 different receptors of the endocannabinoid system. So this signaling can signal increase appetite, reduce pain, create tiredness and go to sleep. Every signal will be different, and there is a combination of these molecules that cause more combinatorial signals. And Professor Rafi Meshulam in the end of the 90s showed that sometimes you need 2 or 3 of these molecules, he called that the entourage effect, in order to get a signal. And this makes it more complicated. 2 things make it very complicated. First, that every cell in our body will be affected by that. Every cell in our body harboring the receptors and can produce endocannabinoids. And every cell in our body, it will act differently. So when we are smelling a barbecue, small molecules from the barbecue, from the burned meat, are entering to our nose, going to our olfactory system, the signaling to a neuron that produces specific endocannabinoids that will go to our pancreas, create insulin, and there is a loop, we call it a feedback loop, that increase our appetite. But this is very specific. A specific cell here in my brain will create a specific endocannabinoid that bind the cell nearby. Cannabis just was unlucky to produce similar molecules, and people started to use cannabis 10,000 years ago and started to breed it and breed and breed it and create a variety of these molecules with high percentage in the plant that can bind these receptors and do a bypass and send a signal instead of our body to send this signal when we are smelling a barbecue, when we're touching a cap, and so on. These molecules from the cannabis will bind the receptors and send the signal. But again, it's very complicated because every cell in our body can be affected. When we are touching a hot glass and our hand feel the pain, the heat, the cells near our nerves will create endocannabinoids to reduce the pain, but it will be very localized in my fingers. When we are digesting cannabis, all our body being floated with these molecules that affect different cells in our body. To make it more complicated, cannabis is not one plant. It's a given name to hundreds or thousands of different chemovars or different genetics that each one of them will contain different combinations of these molecules. And these make it almost impossible, or I wouldn't say impossible because that's what we're doing, but it's making it very difficult to understand which cannabis will affect which cells or which disease or indication. We divide, so the major things that we're trying to do today, and the major obstacle, the major facts that we're looking is to match the right flower to the right bride, or the right flower to the right indication or the right disease. We usually dividing cannabis to 2 types of plants, plants with high THC and plants with another compound, another phytocannabinoid, which called CBD. So plants with high THC and plants with high CBD. But when we started to work with cannabis 7 years ago, we saw that this division is not enough. Sometimes you have the same amount of CBD or the same amount of THC or the same ratio between THC and CBD, and you get different effects. So the classic effect to check is epilepsy. There is already drug with the CBD that treat the epilepsy, and we know that cannabis is really reducing seizures of epilepsy. So what we did in my lab, we create a mice model for epilepsy, and we took 7 different strains or 7 different types of cannabis. We gave the mice the same amount of CBD in each one of them. So doesn't matter how much CBD they have, they're all high CBD, low THC. We gave a dose that will be 5 milligrams of CBD in each plant. But you see that even the CBD was the same being given to the mice, the effect of these plants was totally different on these mice. There was plants that was very effective by reducing the seizures, and there was plant that didn't reduce the seizure, even though they have the same amount of CBD. So it was clear to us that to measure just CBD, THC, or also the other major cannabinoids like CBG and CBN and CBC is not enough. We need to be able to look on all the phytocannabinoids. So we started by creating a library, and we were the first one in the world, it was 6 to 7 years ago, that succeeded to analyze and to see, and to analyze and to separate and to see all the phytocannabinoids. Altogether, we were able to identify 11 families of phytocannabinoids, and today, from all the plants that we tested, we saw more than 160 different phytocannabinoids. Having that, we were able to start to create families of phytocannabinoids and divide them in groups. But what I want to show you in this image, if you look on group 11, there are many phytocannabinoids that doesn't even have a name. We know their structure, we know they are there, we can measure them, but we don't have a clue what they are doing. We don't have a clue if they are important or not, and we doesn't have a name even for these phytocannabinoids. Taking all of that and testing more than thousands of different chemovars or genetics of cannabis, we were able to divide these all phytocannabinoids in groups. Actually, I showed you before that we divide them to high THC and high CBD, but Ethan Russo many years ago published a paper which divided the cannabis to 3 groups. He called them type 1, it's high THC strains, type 3 is high CBD, and type 2 is what we call balanced cannabis that have similar amount of THC and CBD. But what we can see with our measurements and our testing, that there are cannabinoids that will always be just in type 1. Even we don't know the name of these cannabinoids and we don't know what he's doing, we know that he's always will be in type 1, which is high THC. There are cannabinoids that only in type 2, in type 3, which is high CBD. There are cannabinoids that are in these 2 groups, but we were able to create another group, we call it type 4, which is high CBG strains with low THC and low CBD. But this is all analytical work, and this is not why I came to speak with you today. I came to speak with you today to try to show you how we can define which molecules from here affecting which diseases. So how are we doing that? I want to show you 2 routes that we are taking, or 2 paths that we are trying to do in order to match the right combination of molecules to the right indication or right disease. So first of all, if we don't have any idea, we're starting with question that we don't have any data on them, whether cannabis can grow hair. You can see that I will be very happy if cannabis can grow hair, but this is something that I don't have any clue. But if I will go to cancer, whether cannabis can affect different types of cancers. So for example, so how are we doing that? We can take cancer cells or other cells that we want and grow them in a plate. In a plate like that, you will have between 3 million to 10 million cells. And we can take this plate and treat them with cannabis and see how it affects these cells. But we also can grow these cells, let's say cancer cells, in a plate that have many holes, many wells. This is called 96 well plate. So if I'm taking, let's say, prostate cancer, I can grow them all the cells in this plate, and in every well do different experiment. And in my lab, we have equipment to do this test and to do it fast. It's called high throughput screening. We can screen very fast. For example, this equipment, it's an incubator, but also a microscope that can take images and move between the wells. It can take up to 1,000 images an hour. So after 24 hours, there will be 24,000 images. And it can tell you in each well what was the effect. In this well, all the cells die, while in this well, just 20% of the cells die. How many cells proliferate, how many cells move from one place to another, and so on and so on. So here is one example on leukemia cells. Eli Bessner, who is a PhD in my lab, want to test how cannabis affects leukemia. We know that cannabis affects the immune cells and the immune system, but we want to ask how it affects the cancer of the immune cells, we call leukemia. So we test a specific type of leukemia called TLL, and we test many types of cannabis, many chemovars. You see every color here is different. We did it on more than 250. I'm showing here just 15. And what we see here is what this machine showing us is the viability, how many cells survive, how many cells alive. So if the bar is lower, the meaning that more cells die. And you can see that in 2 micrograms per ml, most of the cannabis didn't affect these cells, but there was one type of cannabis, one strain that killed these cells very efficiently. So we ask ourselves, okay, leukemia, it's a given name to few different diseases. There are TLL and CLL and AML. There is leukemia for B cells and leukemia for T cells. And more that in each leukemia, there is specifically what are the mutations. So we ask whether this cannabis is killing all the leukemias or just specific one. So we take 10 types of leukemias and we grow them in a plate and we treat them, and we saw that in 50% of them, the cannabis, this specific strain, extract number 12, didn't affect them at all. But in 50%, it killed them very efficiently. So I said, okay, let's take all the 10 leukemias. We have 5 that it didn't affect them, and 5 that it killed them, and let's make a genetic screen. We did a genetic screen and we defined that in every cell that the cannabis is killing, there is a specific mutation called Notch1. And I won't go to the biology. Notch1, it's a protein sitting on the membrane of the cells, and there are 50% of the TLL of the leukemia patient will harbor mutation in this protein. So every time that there is a mutation in this protein, the cannabis kills it. Look how specific it is. It's not all the cannabis from 250 different strains, just one of them was efficient. It's not all the cancer, it's leukemia. It's not all the leukemia, it's 50% the one that have mutation in Notch1. It's what we call almost personal medicine, to match the right strain to the right patient. So after understanding that, we did a lot of cell biology to understand the mechanism. We did this mutation in mice. We created tumors in mice with this leukemia. We treat the mice, and you can see here in the black, the size of the tumors that not be treated or treated with placebo, how they're growing exponentially, while the size of the tumor that have been treated with extract 12 didn't grow at all. You can see here the tumors before and after 3-week treatment, how they shrink. Because this is a leukemia, we did a bone marrow implantation, we treat the mice, we doubled the span of the life of these mice. So we did actually 5 different mice models, and we proved that this extract is really efficient in this type of leukemia. But now, the $100 million question. If we have all these molecules in this plant, which one is important? Why this plant is unique? Whether we need one of them, we need 3, we need all of them, which molecules we need. So what we're doing, we're dissecting that. Let's say we have 100 molecules with equipment that we have, HPLC preparative, CPC, flash, and equipment that we have in the lab that can separate this molecule. We separate them to groups. Let's say 25 in the first tube, 25 in the second tube, 25 in the third tube, in the fourth tube. And we're going back to the mice or to the cells, and you can see that the placebo didn't kill the cells at all. The extract is very efficient by killing the cells. And now the 4 pieces, and you can see that fraction number 1, number 2 was efficient as well as the whole extract. So we're already eliminating 75% of all of these molecules. And we left just with 25% of them. We did it back and forth until in the end, we succeed to isolate 3 phytocannabinoids, just 3 of them. One of them is totally unknown. That if you're taking the 3 of them, whether you are purifying them from the plant, 100% purification, whether you're doing them synthetic, you get exactly the same effect as the whole extract. Every combination of 1 of them, of 2 of them didn't work. You need just the 3 of them. And after 5 years of work, we understand exactly the mechanism of action. I won't go to the cell biology and the mechanism. I will just say that we know exactly what are the molecules, CBD, CBDV, and 3318, which receptors are binding, what the effect on the ER and the Golgi, what is the mechanism that blocking this protein when he's mutant to go to the membrane, for that reason killing the cells. So we're already understanding exactly why you need these 3 molecules and how they are working and how they're killing the cells. And this is extremely important when you're trying to close the distance between herbal medicine to modern medicine. In herbal medicine, we just say this extract is good for this indication, but modern medicine want to understand exactly the dose and exactly the molecules. Having this ability to take it from here to here, it's actually closing this distance and make this to a modern medicine. So I show that on leukemia. I don't have much time, so I will run fast. I can show that on different types of cancer. This is breast cancer. In breast cancer, we have 3 types of breast cancer. We have a hormonal progesterone plus, estrogen plus, hair plus, and triple negative. I won't go to that. I will just summarize it in few sentences. I said in breast cancer, we define a totally different molecules that actually is usually in high THC strain, a unique molecule with a different structure of what we know, have 3 oxygen here. I won't go to the details, but I will say we define a specific molecule, just one, with a specific structure that when you are exposed it to the cells, it's blocking the estrogen in these cancerous cells to go to the nucleus and to operate the whole process that you need to do. And for that reason, he's blocking the cancer to divide. And if you adding to the medicine that being treated today, it's working very, very efficient to kill these cells and to downsize the tumors and actually eliminate totally these tumors. Again, the message that in different cancer, it's a different strain with a different molecule. So what I showed you till now, that we can screen from scratch with a fast way until we reach to the end. But there are other ways to define which molecules are working. 6-7 years ago, I got an academic grant to do the Israeli database. Actually, in Israel, the patient are getting prescription from physician. The cannabis in Israel, it's under healthcare. In Israel, it's kind of half social. So we all have insurance by the government. So we are not paying for the medicine. So if something is under the healthcare, we pay just symbolically. And cannabis from 2007 is under healthcare. So you can get a prescription from physician for cannabis, and you can go to the pharmacy and get cannabis for your indication. But we don't really know. You're going to the pharmacy and he give you something, or you're choosing something, but we don't really know how to match. So what we did from 2015 to 2020, we create database on the patient. That days there was around 25,000 patients in Israel that getting cannabis. Today it's 5 times more, it's 130,000 patients, but these days it was just 25,000. And we follow up on the patient and we follow up on the cannabis. What the meaning of that? We have agreement with the Ministry of Health and with the growers, and there was just 8 authorized growers that every time that they're picking cannabis, every time that creating an extract, every time that creating a product, it's come to my lab and we're doing full analysis to all the cannabinoids, terpenoids, and flavonoids. So we have database and barcode for every strain, every batch that the patient can get. On the other hand, we collect data on the patient from the Ministry of Health, from the patient, and the idea was to match these two. So if I'm starting to work with indication that is part of what the Ministry of Health giving the patient, I have a lot of knowledge. One of these indications is sleep, how cannabis is affecting sleep. And we saw that almost 50% of the patient say that cannabis improved their sleep. So we create a mice model to measure sleep. And again, I don't have enough time to go to details. I would just say that sleep can divide by 4 different indications. It's how fast you're falling asleep, how deep is your sleep, whether this sleep is going to a dream sleep or what we call in a REM or efficient sleep, and how difficult for you is to wake up. There are people that it will take them 4 hours to fall asleep, but after they fall asleep, their sleep will be very deep and they won't wake up. And there are patients that falling asleep, but every small noise will wake them up. It's a different problem. And cannabis is actually affecting all of these. So we create a mice model for that measuring that. Actually, mice are going to sleep when there is a light, and they are awake when there is a dark. So we have 24 cages with camera that follow up on these mice and measuring how fast they are going to sleep, what is the length of the sleep, whether they are going to REM sleep, and so on and so on. So in this case, we didn't need to start from scratch. We already have data on which strains are the best, or which strain the patient saying that they are best for helping them to sleep. So we choose 15 different cannabis strains that was the best one from all the strains in Israel for that. And we started to screen from strains or cannabis came over that we already know that affecting patients. We're actually doing reverse biology. We already know that it's affecting patients. Now we're asking why. So we choose them, and we in the end, we ended with one strain that was the most efficient. You can see here, it's how fast the mice going to sleep. This is the control, and this is three batches of this strain. And you see that it's really shortened the time that the mice is going to sleep, or in a different way, it's reduced the distance that the mice moving before he's falling asleep. But now, again, the $100 million question. We have many molecules, almost 100 different phytocannabinoids, another around 40 terpenes and flavonoids in that. Which one is important? So we're going with the same methodology. We separate these molecules by our equipment. Every dot, every number here, it's a different cannabinoid. So we dissect it, we separate them in different tubes. This is first tube, this is second tube, this is third tube. Because this is a high THC strain, this is a whole high THC. So we coming back to the mice and we test, and we were very happy to see that this fraction, this part, is the one that causing the mice to go to sleep. It's fraction number 1. So actually, with 0 THC and with without all of these cannabinoids, we still got exactly the same effect. So we don't need the THC to affect the sleep in this specific strain. But we tested what we have in this fraction, and we discovered that there is a lot of CBN and CBG, and CBN considered one of the molecules that might be the cause for sleep. So now we're cutting this out. And we saw that even without CBN, it's still as good as the whole extract, even a little bit better. So with 0 THC, 0 CBN, less than around 60% of the cannabinoids still working as good as the whole extract. We moved forward and forward with this until in the end, we succeed to analyze 2 molecules, just 2 of them. We call them that working as good as the whole extract. We call them GTS1 and GTS2, go to sleep 1 and go to sleep 2. And both of them are unknown, and we're the first one to analyze them and discover them. You need to understand that in that point, in regulatory path, we actually have more than one path. The first one is making medicine, like always. Take these molecules, make them synthetic, purified, go to the FDA, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. The other way is to make this as a plant. And what the meaning? This is the cannabis pathway. First of all, now I have a strain that I have a lot of data from patient, but also for preclinical, that this strain is very efficient for sleep. So now when a patient goes to the pharmacist can advise take this strain because we know that it's working and we know the dosage and so on. But also, I can create another product. And this is, we call the fraction. We can cut the cannabis here, take this out, all the THC, the CBN, and other cannabinoids, and then left with an oil that have just 30% of the cannabinoids. But in this cannabinoid, in this oil, I have the molecules that cause you to go to sleep. So I will have a product which is still cannabis oil, still herbal medicine, still cannabis medicine, but with zero THC and zero side effect of CBN and so on. And this is a very unique and very, I think this will be the next step on the next phase of cannabis medicine that we are going to see. So I want to skip the third one. This third way that we're doing is using AI or artificial intelligence, and we define the specific strain or the specific molecules for migraine here. I'm skipping all of that because I run out of time. I want to say that now we have methodology. We can take a plant, cannabis, but not just cannabis, make an extract, and in my lab we have butane extraction and CO2 supercritical and ethanol and press and so on, so many types of extract. Analyze all the active compounds, take data from patient or run it on high throughput screening, define specific effect, discover and purify the specific molecules if needed, understand the mechanism of action, go to preclinical to mice, and if all of this success, go to clinical trials to prove it, and have a product which can be a single molecules, a combination of molecules, or hold the whole plant, but we know now which plant and what is the dosage. You know, people know that the Epelos are different, right? You know that the Smith one are very sour, and the Macintosh, the red one, are very sweet. We know that there are many different types of apples, and everyone is different. We know that if you buy in watermelon, it can be sweet and it cannot be sweet. You know, in Israel, we're tapping on the watermelon to see, we think we can hear if it's sweet or not. But everyone knows that you're coming to buy fruit, they are different. When you're buying vegetables, they are different, each one of them. But when we are going to herbal medicine, somehow we collect them as a whole and think that everyone will be the same. We know already that cannabis is different, every type of cannabis is different, but this is true for every plant or every herbal medicine. You know, there is this product being sold in Israel. This is a Chinitsea flower, which is improve your immune system, and this is the Valeriana road to make you relax, reduce anxiety. But what do you mean Chinitsea or Valeriana? All the Valeriana are the same. All the flowers, if it's growing in South Africa or growing in Canada, it will be the same with the same compound. Which compounds here reducing anxiety and how it's work? I think the cannabis open our mind and our ability to start to look on complicate medicine and to close the gap between herbal medicine to modern medicine. We can still stay with the herbal, with the natural, but understanding which one is really doing the effect. What is this, the dose and how? And this methodology that I showed you is true for other plants and not just cannabis. My lab today work with algae, with mushrooms, with other plants that are considered for thousands of years as medicines, and now we're trying to close this gap. You know, people using plant as a medicine for thousands of years. But in the last 100 years, we started to isolate molecules from this plant. And every time that it was one molecule, we took it, make it synthetic, go all the pathways of the FDA and create a medicine. Every time that it was more complicated, we just put it aside. Chinitsea, Valeriana, cannabis, psychedelic mushroom, like psilocybin mushroom, ibogaine, and so on and so on. It's true that part of them psychedelic plants, but not just psychedelic plants. Echinacea or valeriana are not psychedelic. But more and more we are understanding what we call today, what we calling polypharmacology. Polypharmacology is when you're treating a disease by modulation more than one pathway, more than one way. So when you go to a physician 4,000 years ago and you have kind of inflammation, he didn't give you one molecule. He take one root from here, one flower from here, one leaf from here, combine them together and give you as a medicine. He created what we call polypharmacology. And I think that the complicated medicine today will come from there. The different what happened in the last 100 years ago and what is now is computer. Understanding pathways or networking of 3, 5, 7 molecules today, it's very easy. We can understand networking of thousands of people or thousands of proteins. So understanding 3 molecules from a plant, what is the pathway, it's very easy today to do today. And I think this is the future. I think this is the future of complicated diseases that we couldn't solve till today. ALS, Alzheimer, cancers, we're hitting our head to the wall in thousands of laboratories and didn't find a solution. And I think cannabis opened the door for us to think complicate. I think cannabis is an orchestra of molecules that working together, what Rafi Meshulam and Ethan Russo call the entourage effect. It's a complicated action. It's a polypharmacology. It's single combination of molecules that working together. I think explaining this to the regulation, to the regulatory, having the accurate explanation will open the door to cannabis to enter in more strength to real medicine, but also to other plants. So this was my talk. Thank you very much for listening. This is my amazing team that doing this work. This is my lab together with my company. And this is now the time to have a disclaimer that I'm not just a professor in the university. I also have a company called Cannasol. They're doing part of the work that you saw till now, mainly the analytical and separation of the molecules. And this is all the team together that doing this amazing work. And again, thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope that next time we'll meet each other face to face. Thank you and goodbye.
So hello, my name is Claude, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this very interesting panel. I am a palliative care specialist working at the McGill University Health Center's Supportive and Palliative Care Department. I also help run the medical cannabis clinic there for oncology patients with Dr. Antonio Vigano. I have no conflicts of interest to declare for this presentation. I have worked extensively with the medical cannabis industry over the last 10 years or so to create educational materials and presentations for healthcare professions. My presentation will focus on my clinical and research experience using medical cannabis within the Canadian regulatory framework, which began in 2001 as the Medical Marijuana Access Regulation. At the time, only one licensed producer could produce and distribute medical cannabis, but personal cultivation was also allowed. However, in 2013, the Marijuana for Medical Purposes Regulation arrived, which opened the market significantly for other licensed producers. But at that time, the government decided to end personal cultivation, but that had to be changed in 2016 with the Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes Regulation, where more licensed producers gradually increased their presence on the market, and personal cultivation was allowed once more. In 2018, the Cannabis Act replaced these former regulatory frameworks and included the medical and recreational access regulations. And it is presently going under another review, which should be coming out in the next few months. We're still unsure how Health Canada will change these regulations, but we're very hopeful that patient safety will remain a priority. One of the main issues that we've had with the regulatory framework from the start is that most medical associations and other regulatory authorities have so far refused to get involved in providing guidelines for clinicians. Medical university programs are still not teaching students about the endocannabinoid system, which I believe is also the case in the United States. The Canadian Pharmacists Association has also been reticent to get involved in dispensing cannabis products and counseling patients, even though the 2018 legislation under the Cannabis Act enabled pharmacies to do so. Now, most health-related matters fall under provincial jurisdiction, however, and none of the provincial governments have so far proposed integrating cannabis in pharmacies after 4 years of legalization. So we're still waiting for pharmacies to get involved in providing counseling for patients, because as you all probably know, providing advice for patients is very time consuming. So this is extremely unfortunate, since repeated Health Canada surveys continue to show that the vast majority of medical cannabis patients or self-described medical cannabis patients continue to purchase their products outside of the medical access program, and few are receiving proper clinical monitoring or supervision. However, the source of the cannabis products used is more likely to be of legal sources, and the latest surveys have shown that only 8% of medical cannabis patients get their cannabis products from either a dealer or some other illegal source. So that is continuing to decline over the last years. Now, there are many reasons to explain why many medical cannabis patients do not go through the legal network or through the medical access program, requiring a document from a healthcare professional. One of these is that few physicians feel comfortable to authorize medical cannabis still. The other reason is that the medical cannabis access program can be a little bit tedious, especially for older patients. It requires an online registration and purchase from licensed cannabis producers, and the product is delivered through registered mail. However, going through the recreational access since 2018 is much simpler for many patients, where they can just go in store to purchase their products or order it online. So for older patients who feel uncomfortable with using the internet, the medical access program today still is still a little bit cumbersome. And unfortunately, in 2022, as we speak, the Canadian Pharmacists Association still has not been able to convince provincial governments to allow them to sell cannabis products or provide counseling to patients, but we're hoping that that will change in the following months. So for the time being, most patients will receive their information from either friends or family or the bud tenders at the provincial outlets who have little or no medical or scientific training. So I admit this is a little bit of a sad state of affairs, especially after 20 years of medical cannabis legislation in Canada. So as of today, most clinicians in Canada feel uncomfortable authorizing and providing information to their patients, and who can really blame them, because we still face many challenges, and probably the most important one is able to do good research. So what is good research when it comes to cannabis? Well, without good research, you can't get medical associations to agree on practice guidelines. And physicians in general do not deal with any new medication if they don't have clear guidelines from their regulatory authorities or medical associations. And the only way that we can get guidelines is by making good research. And that begins with the most basic fact, is that we need product standardization. So product standardization is now a huge hurdle, still a huge hurdle, for researchers everywhere, except at least in certain jurisdictions like in Canada, where we're very fortunate that the federal government has enacted federal level testing requirements for all products, which means that researchers across the country in different centers can have access to the same product, so we can compare the results more efficiently and reliably. So one of the elements of good research is the ability to conduct multi-center trials. In this case, we're using different patient populations. There's a lower risk of bias, and these studies have a tendency to have a greater impact on medical practice. However, when it comes to medical cannabis, most of the studies that have been done up to date, even the ones that study the same outcomes, have been using different products, different concentrations, different routes of administration, and in many times we don't even know which dose of THC or CBD was being used by the patients. So it's very, very difficult to draw any conclusions from combining these studies in meta-analyses or reviews of the literature, since the products change from one study to the next. Now, as I mentioned, in Canada, we're very fortunate to have federal level regulations when it comes to standardized products. And yes, we are conducting trials in multi-centers. However, most of the clinical research in the world is done in the United States. The brains are here. You have almost unlimited resources. But as of 2022, there are still no federal regulations regarding product testing and safety. So performing multi-center trials here in the States is, for the time being, not accessible. And without these multi-center trials using standardized products, we won't be able to address all the issues that concern any new medication that comes onto the market, even the basic issues like determining efficacy. Now, medical cannabis has been reported to be or to provide benefits in all kinds of different clinical situations, but most of these have not been studied appropriately. It's mostly case studies and observational trials, and these just don't cut it when it comes to providing the evidence necessary for medical associations to establish guidelines. Another issue that is still undergoing is the need for pharmacovigilance or long-term safety issues regarding cannabis. Now, a lot of people believe that cannabis has been around for thousands of years, and that should be enough to provide long-term safety data. However, this is not necessarily the case. We know, for example, that acute cannabis intoxication will very rarely cause serious adverse events. Mortality rates from these events are extremely rare. They do occur probably, but they're extremely rare. However, the long-term consequences on cognitive development in children and adolescents is beginning to become much clearer. Long-term mental health issues also need to be fleshed out. We still don't know exactly why certain people end up with chronic mental health problems and others don't. And there's also the issue of using medical cannabis in pregnancy, which is extremely popular. However, recent data tends to suggest that the effects on the children in the long term can be very deleterious. There seems to be an increased risk of mental health and learning issues, but recent data even suggests that there's an increased risk of many types of cancers in these children. So this data needs to be confirmed. It needs to be widely distributed. And even in oncology, which is my area of expertise, it's very popular. Many patients, up to a quarter of patients, will try medical cannabis during their treatment. And we have evidence to suggest today that medical cannabis can reduce the effectiveness of many types of cancer therapies. So patients using this unwittingly can reduce their chances of long-term remission with their cancer treatments. So once we've determined the efficacy and in which clinical conditions it will benefit the most, and we can determine most or not all or all the long-term health-related issues or the safety issues, at that point, that's when we can start choosing the right patient. And that is the patient that will get most of the benefits from using cannabis and the least amount of adverse effects. Or in other words, which patients will get the most bang from their buck. And this is one of the central issues that clinicians need to know, because we don't want to prescribe cannabis to everybody, even though many patients want to have access to cannabis for all kinds of different reasons. We need to find out which conditions will be most advantageous to using medical cannabis. But unfortunately, it doesn't really stop there either, because even if we choose the right patient, we still have little data regarding how to dose it initially, what's the starting dose of cannabis, which products we should use, how do we titrate it, how long we use the treatment, and which frequency we have to establish when patients are being treated with medical cannabis. Because if we look at the data that's out there in the surveys for medical cannabis from medical cannabis patients, we realize that many of them aren't using cannabis every day, although it's only about a third of patients who use medical cannabis every day. Some use it only a few times a week, some use it a few times a month. So we need to figure out what are these conditions and where cannabis can be used and how it can be used. We need to also monitor for possible drug interactions, which are becoming more and more common, especially in oncology. The effects of tolerance that can happen over time, especially when patients are seeking certain effects from using cannabis. Like, for example, certain psychoactive effects such as euphoria have been shown to decrease with time and require higher and higher doses. So that needs to be monitored. And also adverse effects. So in my area of work, we have oncology patients, but some of them have chances for long-term survival. So we need to monitor for cannabis use disorder in these patients and to see if it has an impact on their overall functioning. There's also the issue of exploring some of the potential benefits of cannabis psychoactivity. Now, this is not something that is usually included in most cannabis clinical trials. When patients experience psychoactivity, it is usually described as adverse effects. However, in certain circumstances, there seems to be evidence to show that patients can get benefits from the peculiar and unique effects of cannabis, but this requires much closer monitoring, of course. I'll talk about that a little later in the next slide. So once all this data is put together and it becomes clear, we can paint a clearer picture of what the role of cannabis is in our practice. At that point, then we can start to envision it being included in medical university curriculums. Because as I've said earlier, the very few universities in North America have a program or a course on medical cannabis, and even fewer have a basic course on the endocannabinoid system. So, although we don't have many of the answers to these lingering questions, I believe we still have enough preliminary data to suggest some form of guidance for clinicians. Maybe not official guidelines, because that will take probably years before we can establish the facts. But I think we can move forward at least with safety as a main concern for patients, and that requires at the basic facts. It requires product standardization and testing. So for these reasons, I decided to publish a medical textbook this year. It was published in February. I was very fortunate to work with some of the best experts in the field, in my opinion, Dr. Davis and Denick, who are palliative care specialists, and Daniel Schechter, who, in my opinion, is probably one of the most experienced cannabis clinicians out there. So we all decided to get together and create a more of a comprehensive guide to manage medical cannabis in what we consider to be the most frail and sort of difficult patient population to handle, which are advanced cancer and palliative care patients, because these patients are often very frail, are taking many types of medications, and require a very, very careful initiation to medical cannabis. Now, the reason why we chose this patient population is that we believe that these are the patients who will probably get the most benefits from using medical cannabis. They often have many different symptoms that either arise from their illness or from the treatments, such as pain and nausea, and reduced appetite, fatigue, insomnia, anxiety. And these are all symptoms which are arising from different areas of the brain where the endocannabinoid system is usually present. And THC in particular, and CBD as well, can offer a sort of a general mild effect on all these symptoms. And as such, it provides sort of a layer of comfort, which usually is better tolerated by patients when compared to using several other types of drugs. And patients often feel that they feel more functional with cannabis than with, for example, using opioids for mild to moderate pain. And they can continue to interact with their surroundings more easily and have less cognitive problems such as brain fog. Now, using medical cannabis does not mean we will not use other medications, but oftentimes we can use lower doses of the other medications that we use for treating these specific symptoms. We have a dedicated chapter on initiating cannabis in oncology patients using smaller initial doses than those provided by even expert panels that I've participated in the past. Because even with small doses of THC, patients with multiple comorbidities who are very frail can oftentimes accidentally overdose, and this is unfortunate because it can prevent them from pursuing this therapy, and they won't get any further benefits. However, those that manage to pursue this exploration often discover the peculiar effects of THC, for example, that comes into play at different therapeutic windows. At smaller doses, it's been shown to help reduce many symptoms such as nausea and pain. However, at higher doses, certain psychoactive effects can start to occur, which can be interesting for some patients, which can provide certain types of relief, and in others, they may find it a little too distressing, but requires close monitoring. And at even higher doses, THC has been shown to exhibit similar effects to traditional psychedelics, such as psilocybin or LSD. Although these explorations should probably be tried with other compounds because THC does have a significant effect on the cardiovascular system at these doses, and patients often don't tolerate these side effects. However, we do have probably enough information at the time being to at least provide some kind of preliminary guidance on using THC-rich cannabis for the exploration of mild to moderate psychoactivity in oncology patients, at least, where certain psychological issues such as death anxiety can become an important issue for these patients. And so we've dedicated a chapter on this issue where set and setting are used as the basic framework to introduce cannabis for these purposes, since THC does share the similarities that I've mentioned earlier with other traditional psychedelics. And so just to give you a brief overview of this interesting topic, like I mentioned a little earlier, THC, when it is used at higher doses, actually can alter the brain's normal state of waking consciousness, which means that it will alter how we access our memories and how we process our emotions, and even how we determine the significance of what crosses the field of our awareness. And as such, it can also increase our capacity for insight, which can help patients deal more effectively with either past trauma or provide a brief escape from the torments of their terminal illness. However, as I mentioned, many of these issues still require extensive research, and I'm very hopeful that legislation will be passed in the US, which will address at least the main issue of standardization of products. And to finish, let me just thank Steph Scherer and the ASA for inviting me. And let me just say that I believe that of all the advocacy groups, I think they're the ones who are doing their homework properly. And so if you want to contact me for any further information, please feel free to write at this email address.
Yeah, I'm back to normal.
Well, Dedi, thanks for staying up for us tonight for the Q&A. As always, let's give it a little bit. It was great to hear you guys speak. And I know both of you had said that you guys were excited about meeting each other. So if you guys have questions for each other,
definitely excited to meet Dedi. Now, Dedi, is that your usual name, or you prefer David as a first name basis?
My parents called me Dedi, but it came from David. I named by behalf of my cousin that died. His name was David, and his nickname was Dedi, but I was born as Dedi already. So
Nice.
you can take it to both ways. I'm fine with both.
All right, because I noticed, like, I was like looking through like the scientific literature, and the name David and Dedi would show up like in different like publications. I'm saying, is this the same person? I wasn't sure, but I suppose.
Well, Dedi, one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about is I love hearing you present, and I think it definitely fits in with the theme of the future of medical cannabis. And it seems like so far away for medical cannabis patients here in the United States. And I believe you and I have talked about this, about sort of the history of the program in Israel, and that you guys were actually much more similar to what we see here in the United States, to where you guys are now today. And so I'm wondering if you could tell our members and our viewers a little bit about sort of that transition, moving from the sort of, we call them growers with the heart, to more of a clinical setting.
Yeah, so medical cannabis started in Israel in 2007. And I think we can blame Rafi Meshulam that it's very established in Israel. So Rafi, who is kind of the godfather of cannabis and find the cannabinoids in the 60s, is very known and important scientist in Israel, not just in cannabis. He was the rector or the president of the Hebrew University, or University in Jerusalem, which is one of the biggest. So he wasn't just another scientist, and it caused that, at least scientifically, it was accepted in Israel in a way. And in 2007, the healthcare in Israel decided to put it under healthcare and to give it to patient. So Israel is kind of half social. We all have insurance by the government, and it's deductible from our taxes. We're paying for that, but doesn't matter if you're working or not, you will be covered by the government. And when we're going to hospital, or where we're going to buy medicines, it's not, money is not involved. So when I'm going to emergency room or to hospital, I don't need to pay. There is no discussion money. Somebody who is paying on me. So I have insurance that will take care of that. Nobody care. And the meaning of that when cannabis is under healthcare, it's under this umbrella. And so cannabis being given in Israel as a prescription from a physician, and you're getting in pharmacy, and you can get it in the hospital, and it's under healthcare. And there is a lot of meaning by that, how the citizen, how the population, how the physician look on cannabis. It's kind of look like as a medicine, even though it didn't cross FDA, and there is an argument whether it's a medicine. But I'm always saying to the physician, if you give a prescription for something that the patient getting it in pharmacy instead of other drugs, how you call it, it's a medicine, right? So I think this was slow process. But I started to work with cannabis 8 years ago, and it was still difficult to convince physician to prescribe it in the hospital. I remember talks in the hospital that they said to me, on my dead body. And this physician today prescribe hundreds of prescription every month, and they don't remember. They said, no way I said that. Yeah, I have a record. And it's good in a way, and it's opened the door for other treatment like that, and to more complicated treatment. So in Israel, there is no legalization. You can't buy cannabis in a dispensary, but it's more a medicine, more than a drug. You get it in a pharmacy, and there is a plus and minus for that. But as a scientist, I might say, and also one that working with patients, it's a big plus.
No, thank you for that. I think
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. Yeah, no, you absolutely did. I think, in in the U.S., I think as you both know, we were the creators of the war on drugs. So many lovely things to accredit to the United States, but that is a big one. And we didn't keep our war here. We spread that war across the globe through the UN and through other trade policies. And so, for our patients, once we get a state law and we finally get that dispensary, they're really afraid of a different system, right? They're really afraid of it being more of a federal program, because we very much have to talk about money every time we talk about medicine in the United States. And there are, there's two healthcare systems here in the United States. There's one for the wealthier population, and then there's one for poor people, and many of us. So I think people are a little nervous but I think what I think both Claude and Dedi were talking about, this sort of this future where you could actually talk about your medical condition and go to a pharmacist and actually have them recommend something beyond sort of what is the flavor of the month. And actually another challenge for our patients is that they're paying 100% out of pocket for medical cannabis, and when they go into the dispensary, they have to experiment every time. So they're not just paying for that one medication that's going to work for them out of pocket. They've got to buy 3 or 4 things and hope that one of them works. And then when they find that one that works, most likely that product's not going to be there the next time they go there. But Claude, I so appreciate your textbook. And one of the things you and I were talking about was actually trying to do a webinar here in the United States to educate US doctors. And then you brought up very quickly how, what a challenge it would be to be a doctor in the United States. And so maybe you can talk to folks about that to really understand some of that gap between medical education and the products that are available.
Well, yeah, no, I agree, and I have actually a question for Dedi. Is the products that are used in Israel, when the patient goes to the pharmacy, what's the testing requirements and the label accuracy of the products used in Israel? Is it federal regulation?
Yeah, it's federal regulation. I would say, to my opinion, too tight. I'm part of the Minister of Health committees, and it's too crazy, and it's put a problem. I would say the pesticides and the potency and everything need to be tested in a way that none of other products being tested. So for one hand, it's very, very regulated. On the other hand, it's put a lot of barrier on the growers, and because the price is fixed by the government, and they need to test it so much, and just a disclaimer: I have a company that doing this test, so but I'm not happy for what we need to test because it's too much. So it's bring in a position that in the last 2 years, the growers losing a lot of money, like they couldn't stand it. And this is started to create problems because growers are shutting down, and then so there is plus and minus to everything. But to answer, the test is very, very federal regulated and very, very, very tight.
So the patient knows what they're taking, and when the patient brings their bottles to the physician, he can be pretty sure he knows the dosage of every milligram of CBD and THC that they're taking,
CBD and THC, yes, and I can ask you the question now. What else you think should be on the label? Because I'm the one that take the decisions on that on Israel. Every committee ask me what it should be added. And I think to add molecules that none of us know what they're meaning, from one hand can give information and learning from that, from other hand confusing the patient very much. We don't know about even major CBC or CBDV or THCV. We don't know much, And I'm not talking about, CBL or other, I can say the names of cannabinoids that I will be the only one that knows that they are there. So why to label them? We need to test them. The government must authorize us to test them, but we don't label them just because I think it will confuse the patient more than it will help in that
Well,
sense.
I mean, I look at what you've done over the last over the last few years, and I mean, life was much more simple before I started reading your studies. All I had was THC and CBD, and life was just perfect. And then you just sort of threw a wrench in all the works, in the sense that the 2019 study that you published in the Oncologist with the effects with the checkpoint inhibitors, that just threw us for a loop. Because in oncology, we're realizing that 50% of patients taking checkpoint inhibitors, I think 50% of oncology patients that are taking cannabis are also taking checkpoint inhibitors. So that's a catastrophe. And we're like, this study is very, very concerning, and we have no idea where we're going with.
Can you summarize the study for our viewers who maybe didn't get a chance to read his study?
Yeah, I would like, that'd be great if you still think that's a thing, because I read 3 reviews afterwards that included your study, and they all sort of like had this big, huge question mark above, still surrounding that.
So I have big question marks on that too, and unfortunately, we published a research 2 weeks ago with a different group that's showing different. So I have names on 2 groups that showing different things, and because the reason for that, and the reason that I'm willing and I support this data, because it's cannabis. The patient didn't take the same product. And we already knows, I have 2 PhD students that are working on the microenvironment of the tumor. So what we are talking about, we showed that a few years ago, the head of the oncology department of one of the biggest hospital did a study and with me about cannabis and checkpoint inhibitors, or what we call the immunotherapy. So we actually, if I will flatten that, we give a drug that teaching the immune system to attack the cancer cells, okay? Usually the cancer cells avoiding or know how to fool the immune system, and we are telling the immune system every time that there is this protein, PD-L1, you can attack these cells.
And let me just add that 60%, I think, of tumors right now, there's room for immunotherapy or PD-1 inhibitors for nearly half, if not more, of all cancer types right now on the market. So this is a lot.
And this is the tip of the treatment today for the patient. It's working very well. And what we showed, and there is a lot of logic about it, we know that cannabis is kind of inhibiting the immune system or tune down the immune system when it's in hyperactivity. So we are activating the immune system by a drug, but then give a cannabis that tune it down. So it's kind of conflicting, and we showed in clinical trials and on patients that it's reduced the possibility for the drug to help the patient. And since then, we did a lot of work, and we are showing that different compounds doing different effects. So this is a paper now in publication. I can send you the manuscript that we showed that CBGs actually increase the the activity of the checkpoints, while THC and CBD decrease. So again, these are different compounds doing the.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you believe it's THC and CBD that are responsible?
No. So sorry. High THC strains and high CBD strains showing to reduce, but then we showed few extracts that increase the activity. And we succeed to narrow it down to CBG, what was the compound there. And then we took a high CBG strain, and we are showing that it's working very good together with the PD-L1. And we have the explanation for that. It's changing the cytokines that the tumor releasing, and by that changing the macrophage and the active, the immune systems are reaching the cells. I don't want to go, I don't know who is the audience and how many physicians and scientists we have here.
Well, so, I'll let the 2 of you continue that conversation offline.
Yeah, exactly.
have some questions from our
Yeah, we
members.
do have a bunch of questions rolling in for you guys. So let me start with I get this one a lot, so let me start with this one. Many of the U.S. physicians and allied health providers cite lack of research in order to recommend or even consider medical cannabis. We do not have a lot of clinical trials here in the U.S., so they have not seen evidence-based data. That's the excuse they use. Why can't we share Israel's research, which is ahead of ours, to provide more evidence-based data?
First of all, I hope you're sharing and you're reading the work that's been done here. But I will say, we are using the terminology clinical trials, but it's more clinical studies because it's not really single compounds and dosing and other things that are still lacking. We're doing quite a lot of clinical studies, so on patient, taking blood samples, checking the endocannabinoids, testing, and you need to understand that the studies that we did last year will publish next year, so sometimes in these talks when people saying I read your works and that, I'm kind of quite embarrassed because the works that I'm really proud of them we didn't publish them yet, like the immune checkpoints and all of that. But we are sharing data. We are scientists and we are academia, and we're sharing everything. I don't think that we are discovering big things yet that is important enough. We are scratching, the beginning, and even though, I participate in more than 20 clinical trials, I don't think it's really big numbers. If you're taking, I don't know, breast cancer in the US, you have more than 1,500 trials that's running. And we're talking about 20 clinical studies, not in the highest level. So it's not big enough and not educated enough. That's first. And I think we should do way more, that's for sure. I'm teaching in Israel in order to prescribe cannabis, physicians and nurses to treat, of pharmacists to work with cannabis. They need to cross a course of 20 hours. And I'm teaching in that course and I'm responsible. And one of the major problems, what we're teaching, I don't know much. I don't know to match really which cannabis a patient need to take for indication or how to dose it. I'm mainly teaching them how much it's complicated and how much it's their responsibility to take care and to learn more and to help us to learn. But we don't know enough in order to teach. That's the reality, so.
And I think if I could answer that, on one hand, I feel like the response that there's not enough research is sort of a lazy response that doctors are giving because they don't want to learn about it. The reality is whether they want to write recommendations for cannabis or not, a majority of their patients are using cannabis, whether they're telling them or not, and they should step up and learn a little bit more about it. But it's true what Dedi said is that if you ask a researcher, they're gonna say, we always need more research, right? And if you read at the end of any study, they say, and more research needs to be done, of course. But what that also means for cannabis is that we're also talking about a new approach to medicine. And because the endocannabinoid system is as unique as a fingerprint, we're not going to have a take 2 pills and call me tomorrow, sort of ever have that relationship with cannabis. And the few drugs that have made it through the FDA process, which is what doctors want to see, because it means they can take the learning and thinking out of it, that those aren't working for patients. So Dedi's right, you can share this research, but it's also fair to be like, look, we're learning more about this every day. But you have to, kind of put on a new pair of glasses to look at the potential benefits of medical cannabis.
And I'm sorry.
So Steph, I want to say just one comment.
Yes,
We're a population of 8 million people in Israel, and there is 130,000 prescriptions every month. It's the most prescribed medicine today in Israel. So
wow.
when I'm speaking with physicians, I said, my patient have 4 legs and a tail. It's your responsibility to learn and to learn fast, because most of your patients are using cannabis. So, and I think in Israel, there is a willing and there is a need to do that. It's still very slow and not in the. I think the government should put way more money on research and study. In the end, this is the engine for every scientist and physician to do studies and to do research, and it's part of that. And 3-4 years ago, the big cannabis growers pour money on research and study, and they called themselves pharma companies. They didn't understand yet what the meaning of, when they do understand, they call themselves growers. They don't want to be pharma companies. But this stopped, and I think the government, or the federal, need to put money on research. It's their responsibility. And when the NIH and the big, the states will get into that, then it will move fast. In Israel, we're not big enough and not sponsor enough to do that.
Yeah, Claude, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's I find it amazing because here in Canada as well, there must be at least 4.5 million self-described medical cannabis patients. It's been estimated, but only about 300,000 or so are being followed clinically. So there's about maybe 15%, less than 15%. Most of them are just doing it on their own. And like Dedi said, I mean, physicians, I mean, we can decide as collectively say, well, we're not going to get involved. And that's the way it's been in Canada since the start. The government was forced to enact legislation by the courts. And that's how the ball got started. But nobody wanted to take up that hot potato. So the government just threw it over to the Health Canada, and they created a framework, but the medical associations didn't want anything to do with it. So in the end, it was a handful of physicians and nurse practitioners across the country who pioneered the clinical sort of applications of cannabis. And now, luckily, we had the industry for a while that could finance educational programs, and they did a really good job. I mean, of course, they want to move product. It's an industry, right? But at the same time, there was some good enough, oversight, and I believe most of them at least did a fine job of doing educational materials. But it's still too complicated to authorize cannabis. In Canada, you can't prescribe it. It's not a recognized medication. So you have to send a medical document to a licensed producer by fax to authorize patients. And the authorization process is archaic. You have to prescribe grams of cannabis per day, which doesn't really make any sense anymore. We should be prescribing milligrams of THC, milligrams of CBD, and now milligrams of CBG. Thank you, Dedi, making my life complicated. But no, I'm going to stick to THC and CBD for now. I'm not mentioning CBG in any of my presentations. I'm sorry. It's just too complicated. But so the government is really slow to act, and pharmacists, at least in Israel, pharmacists can give counseling to patients. In Canada, physicians are the only ones giving, the counseling to patients. It takes me hours and hours and hours and hours of trying to explain to an 80-year-old patient, over and over and over again, no, you're not going to get high. It's just CBD, and people are just afraid, and they go to their pharmacist, and pharmacists say, well, I don't know anything about cannabis. So, pharmacists spend a lot of time counseling their patients, but all kinds of different things. But there's no incentive for them here because they still can't sell it in the pharmacies. And this new updated version with the Health Canada legislation, because I mentioned to Steph that there was a new reform that was going to be coming out in the next few months. It actually came out 2 days ago after I made my presentation. And it seems that, well, we thought we were going to have like fireworks, and now it's going to look like a wet firecracker. So about the only thing they're going to change is they're going to reduce the requirements for non-therapeutic use of cannabis. So if you're going to be using cannabis to study like harms and social issues and stuff like that, it's going to be easier to make those kinds of studies. But for medical research, it's still going to be a lot of hurdles. And still no news about provincial governments allowing pharmacists to allow them to dispense cannabis. So we're so far away from a decent sort of work environment. And so I'm a little bit discouraged, but not completely. So at least, I'm doing my little job, in my little corner, taking care of my cancer patients and, trying to get them on board. But it's like a tip, like you say, it's the tip of the iceberg. Where like there's so much more that needs to get done, and I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. And that's a bit of a drag. So that's my take on it. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. So we just have a couple more minutes. So I just want to end with asking both of you, in the spirit of this panel, of the future of medical cannabis. If I was offering you a genie in a bottle, what would you be most excited about for the future of medical cannabis? And Claude, we'll start with you.
It's very simple. It's very simple. Once the US enacts federal regulations regarding product testing, safety, and labeling, then some serious research will start happening, because 30% of every medical study comes out of the US every year. So the US is this world center for medical research. You guys have unlimited resources, okay? But you have shitty products, all right?
You don't have to tell us.
Sorry for using my French. I hope you didn't mind. I added adverbs to my pronouns because I thought pronouns were just not enough to describe who I really am.
Okay, so that's actually something we're going to be talking about, in a minute, is actually passing federal legislation to get those standards. So hopefully we can help.
That's the top of the hill. The snowball is going to start from there, and it's going to roll down, and all the good's going to happen after that. That's my take.
I'll see how much I can be your genie then. What about you, Dedi? Genie.
If I will get a genie, I have a few other things to ask from him, but I will.
Only one. Only one. You only got one.
I agree with Claude that the most important thing is that the US will start to do work, because this is the center and we are very tiny by that. Okay. I would say that I see changes happening during the years, and what I see happening during the last year or the last 2 years, that mid-range pharma companies, not the biggest, not Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, but mid-range. In Israel, it's Teva. In Europe, it's Dr. Reddy and others. The mid-range see cannabis as a generic drug. So it's not a drug with IP, but it's generic drug, and they are generic company. They usually not develop drugs. They're waiting the big ones to develop and they take over. So they looked on cannabis as a generic drug, and there is a bar when it's become profitable. It's just about money. Nobody think more than that. But at least in Israel, when the number crossed 80,000, it started to be interesting to Teva. When it's reached 130, they open a whole department in Teva for a cannabis sales and stuff like that. When they're entering, they know how to convince the government now to open it for sleep indication, what were not in Israel, and other things that they think is important. They know how to sponsor more studies. They know how to do that better. There are, when big conglomerate and big giants started to push forward, then it started to move. Okay. And I think we need to embrace it and not to fight with it. The cannabis growers, I'm sorry for saying that because it's my best friend, but the hippies, don't like the pharma there or the big companies or the government. It's nice to fight against them. You feel young and then a pirate. But actually, if you want the patient really to get it in a good way, if we want my mother who is 79 to get cannabis, we need these ones too. Then we need to embrace, we need to help them, we need to teach them, we need to try to make them in the right way and not the wrong way. But I see that happening. I was in a meeting yesterday in Teva that want exclusivity to that they are moving forward and they're moving in the right ways. And don't be wrong. In the end, it's people that did the PhD with me that working now in Teva, and I'm in the Technion. At least in Israel, it's small enough. So this is my friends, and this is people that I know. They're not bad people for sure, and they have a lot of force. And I hope this will change the map slowly, but will change the map too.
Thank you for that, Dedi. And can we get a round of applause for our speakers? I don't know if you guys can see the little reactions coming up, but
Yay.
yay.
I had one more question, Stuart. We have no time, eh?
Yeah, we got to move on. But hopefully I can get you guys to come here in May for our live conference. And
Eddie, I'm there. You there?
I had the tickets and the hotel now. I'm frustrated.
I was going to spend 4 days in Washington. It was a great party,
Exactly.
That, not only were we worried about COVID, but just so you guys know, this has been the worst weather ever this week. It has been gray and horrible. So you weren't missing much. You can't even be outside to be comfortable. So I will promise you good weather and I'll be in. Okay.
I'm there.
On behalf of Americans for Safe Act staff, the board, and all of our members, we want to say a very special thank you to our Unity sponsors for the 2022 Unity Conference. This is our 10th annual conference, and I know many of these sponsors have been with us for the last 10 years. So I want to say a very special thank you to Dr. Bonners, to Metric, to 3C Cannabis Consulting, to Canopy Growth, Tacoma Wellness, the American Herbal Products Association, Cannabis for Cancer Declaration, Cannabis MD, Columbia Care, Council for Federal Cannabis Regulations, Healer, the National Pain Relief, Supply Chain OpEx Consulting, the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, UKTI Collective, and Evoke. Again, thank you so much. This has been a great conference, and we couldn't have done it without you all.